So because this is the main part, I think I'm going to do conclusions on Bastions first, because Cantrips will be interesting, but I think this is more interesting as my headset falls off. I'm trying to gather my thoughts on this. Because here, there's two things that you have to understand, right? One, Bastions to me feel like if you use these, you're not using either Strongholds and Followers or Kingdoms and Warfare. And I can very safely say that even if these two had come out side by side, like Bastions and Kingdoms and Warfare, I think I would have still gone with Kingdoms and Warfare. Partially because I really enjoy Colville's work, but also partially because I feel like that system... To be fair, you shouldn't compare it with Kingdoms of Warfare, you should compare it with Strongholds and Followers. Right? But even then, Strongholds and Followers feels different. The only thing that I still have with Strongholds and Followers is the fact that I don't like the fact that there's a very large emphasis on the keep is for one character. There's one character who is in charge of the keep. That's something that I'm personally still not a fan of. It's also something that I've kind of eliminated a lot, and I'm very happy with Kingdoms and Warfare not really having that. But then again, here, right? Because, and of course, you've already noticed, like here, you also have that element. You also have that element of a Bastion belongs to one character. However, they do make it seem as if it's very easy to just give each player their own Bastion. And I'm gonna be perfectly honest. I'm not gonna say that Bastions in and of themselves will break your character. They won't, because there's a lot of limitations put in, except for the bloody trinket death ward stuff. Although I will say there's a couple of them in there that are pretty good. The same way that, like, you know, Weapon Mastery had a couple of really good ones. That just break everything. And I do get how this is more of a role-playing thing in a lot of cases than... Like, I will be honest, like, you probably have to pick what you want more from a role-playing perspective than from a mechanical perspective. But if I'm being perfectly honest, the big thing for me is I don't think you should do Bastions unless everybody agrees. And that's a very big difference with Kingdoms and Warfare. Because in the end, Kingdoms and Warfare can be led by 1, 2, or 3 players, and the others follow a little bit, and they can give their opinion in it, but they don't have to, like, think about the day-to-day business, because it's toned down to a certain extent where a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff is very easy to just do with one role. Here, I feel like if you're gonna have 3 players who do the nitty-gritty stuff, sure, like the upgrading and buying and the orders and all that stuff, you can technically do that in between sessions, but there's such a big difference between someone who has, or not such a big, but there is a difference between someone who has a Bastion and someone who does not. If you have someone who literally has 2 lieutenants and every 7 days they can summon an additional veteran, that's not bad to have. And sure, that's level 17, but they're also going to make money. They're also going to make magic items. They're going to start making healing potions. They're capable of getting menagerie creatures at level 13. They're capable of harvesting stuff. Like, they're gaming hall, honestly, just make money, right? They get one lucky break where maybe they get flipping, what is it, 10d6, 60, 600 gold pieces. I don't know, right? It feels very much like they do mention this. Like, of course, if the demiplane says, well, you can't scry on the demiplane, you really only need one character to have a demiplane with scry proof. You put the entire party in there, no one can scry on you, and no one can follow your meeting. It's just, it feels like if you don't have a Bastion and another player does, there's going to be an element of unfairness, I feel. And you can make the argument, yeah, but the others don't have to spend their money. No, but you can get a magic item every single level, technically. If you build up your thingy every level, every 2 levels, you can probably get enough build points to get a thing. You can resurrect yourself for 100 build points. You can do things that the other guy can't. And I get it, if you can guess Death Ward with a token at any point in time, then everybody benefits from that. I get it, but they get options that you don't. So I feel like the idea that some players can have a Bastion and some don't, I wouldn't do that. I think either everybody gets a Bastion or nobody gets a Bastion, and I think nobody gets a Bastion is completely fine. Other than that, it's relatively unbalanced, and I mean, it's supposed to be unbalanced. This is not a complaint about the balance, to be honest. Like, if it's unbalanced, it's unbalanced. I don't care. It feels like some things are more powerful than others. That makes sense. I feel like there is just a very large emphasis on 7 days, right? Like, don't get me wrong. Like, Kingdoms in Warfare also puts emphasis on domain turns, and I do that in 10 days. So every single time you do an attack, you have 10 days for each domain action. The difference there is your domain actions and turns do not affect you. They just affect the outcome of the battle ahead, and that battle then affects your characters. But your characters can just completely free roam, do whatever the hell they want. Which is one thing that the Bastion doesn't have. You're supposed to come back to your Bastion every now and again. But second of all, because actually, I'll talk about that in a second. But like with Kingdoms in Warfare, I feel like you have a little bit more freedom, and it's like this, just you have this one giant intrigue. It takes a certain amount of time, certain amount of and in the end your players are still, if they choose to be, they are still far more important to how that goes. Right? If the players send their army as sort of a distraction, but then go in from the back of the city, whereas the army is entirely preparing on the front, and they assassinate two of the generals, the army starts falling apart, the attack happens, the party now kills the rest of the generals, GG, game over, we win, we get the city. The army was there in case of like a plan B, sort of what they're doing Coimitar right now, in the moment I'm recording this. So it feels like in this there's a lot less freedom, and the big thing here is I've now played with, like, you have hirelings, you have generals, you have people that run your facilities for you. Are you telling me that these people are completely incapable of choosing an order if necessary? No, if you, like, I don't mind the maintain order action, right? I don't even mind it being a full-on action if you really want it to be. If you notice that like a bunch of your facilities don't do anything, you just go maintain order and you get a certain amount of build points, sure, that's fine. But the problem that I have is like you have to go to your bastion every domain action, which you guys are apparently expecting to be every 7 days. Or else you have to do a maintain order and you have to roll for an event. And that to me, see, this is the issue I remember having with, this is my biggest issue with Pathfinder Kingmaker. Right? Kingmaker has a kingdom system that I feel is pretty good. And to be fair, there you have the downside of if your kingdom falls, you lose the game. But that's not the important part here. The important part in Kingdoms in Pathfinder Kingmaker is if you go outside of your domain, you can't give orders in your domain. Which means you are constantly forced to go out of your domain to do whatever hell quest you want to do, and then go back into your domain. And I get the fact that this might seem more realistic to certain people, but to me, from a gameplay perspective, that's not fun. I want to be able to just go across the map and explore and take my time and have fun. And of course, you have the extended rest in Kingdoms of Warfare, which in Kingdoms of Warfare and Strongholds and Followers, like the 10-day downtime, that allows you to get certain abilities and allows you to reset certain things, right? You get your domain dice back after an extended rest. But in the end, that's not a necessary thing. That's like a little bonus. It's like, okay, we want our domain dice for the next fight. We just take 10 days at some points and we get them back, and then we go in, we get our domain dice fight, boom, we go for it. That's it. And here it feels like you're going to be constantly forced back to your bastion, or you're going to lose a lot of power of your bastion. And I don't like that. I think you should be able to order and do whatever the hell you want. I also think, as I've said, several of the features that are given from several of these things are very campaign dependent. If something is not, like, the demi-plane is probably one of the best examples. If you can't get a fight within the next 24 hours after you have had a long rest in your demi-plane, that temporary hit point bonus is useless. Contact other planes, sure, that gets you information. Wait, was it contact? No, that was another one. What a demi-plane? Oh, you can create items, but you're level 17. At this point, you can probably buy every single item in the bloody game in a lot of cases, so I don't know how useful that really is. And then you can't be scryed on. That's good. That's pretty good. Also very campaign dependent again. If your final villain is a caster, then yes, please don't scry on us. But other than that, that's the only value that that demi-plane seems to really give that's really good. And that's because the first feature, the 5 times level temporary hit points, are tied to staying in your bastion. And a lot of those features are like that, because if you're not able to travel to your destination in 7 days, the feature's useless. So I don't know. I feel like it almost feels like you need to specifically run a Bastion campaign for this. At which point, I don't even know if this necessarily fits in the Dungeon Master's Guide in its current form. Maybe it does, but it feels like this should be like a rule extension, not necessarily a Dungeon Master's Guide. Dungeon Master's Guide should be about teaching a player how to become a Dungeon Master. Not about, here, have a set of rules that you might use if you're specifically going to point your campaign at it. And again, I still think that Kingdoms and Warfare is just superior, if I'm being honest. I like the Defender idea with the D6s. I like that. And I like several of the room features. I don't think I think the system, similarly to the weapon mastery system, I think this has potential. I just think there's a lot of kinks in there that either don't allow it to solve the problem that you're trying to solve. Like this doesn't feel like you're going to obtain a domain. This just feels like you now have a home. Pretty much this feels like Grayskull Keep in Critical Role Campaign 1, where they had to keep, right? That is what this would be for. But that's also where it stops. And I think we've all noticed the amount of times that Vox Machina went back to Grayskull Keep, right? Especially when thingy happened, when the Chroma Conclave arc happened, because then the entire city was taken over, and now all of a sudden they've lost the ability to go into their keep, you know? It because you don't want them constantly going back to that keep at that point, right? Or maybe at this point it's Whitestone, and now you have to go back to Whitestone every 7 days. Do you really want to force them to do that? No. So yeah, I think it's a good start to a system, but it is very flawed. And I think even though it partially fixes a certain fantasy that certain players probably have, I think mechanically and story-wise, it is going to force you to go back too often in its current form. Honestly, I think a lot of your problems get fixed if you... I think a lot of your problems get fixed if you have a DM that pretty much just makes the domain actions milestone dependent. I think it fixes a lot of things if those 7 days and a lot of those rooms become until the next domain action. I think a lot of stuff gets fixed if you don't force your players to do a maintain action if they are not present in their bastion. I think they should be able to just run their actions however the hell they want. And actually, I think the last one's the biggest one. I think if you allow that, this becomes a far better system already. I still am not the biggest fan, but at that point, at least it shows a little bit of potential. Other than that, like, I will say, a lot of these do feel like, you know, a lot of these do feel like just things that we saw in Xanathars, right? Like downtime stuff. So, yeah. I think they've also been very careful with their effects, if I'm being honest. It doesn't feel like they really, except for maybe the War Room, I don't feel like they've really gone overboard. And maybe the Menagerie. The Menagerie maybe as well. But yeah.